With all the excitement surrounding Avengers Endgame, it's easy to forget that Spider-Man Far From Home is just around the corner. The 23rd movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has recently been confirmed to be the final movie of Phase 3 of the franchise, and not the first movie of Phase 4, as was previously thought. But even though Far From Home currently dwells in Endgame's shadow, superhero movie fans have been coming up with theories about the MCU's second Spider-Man offering for some time. In this video, we'll take you through 15 of the best of them, and please be aware it contains very minor spoilers for Avengers Endgame. We'll warn you when they're about to come. This first theory suggests that Zendaya's MJ is actually Nick Fury's daughter. Fury has spent the last few years in hiding, and hasn't been seen a whole lot in the modern-day MCU since 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron. He may very well have been protecting his family in that time, which is where MJ comes in. Like her theorized father, MJ is pretty sneaky, and is always creeping up on people, while her wardrobe is often dark in color, just like Fury's. There's also the fact that her hair is often covering one eye, which could also be a clue, given that Fury wears an eye patch. Additionally, she's always profiling people, and seems to know a little bit too much about Peter Parker, as if she's seen a top-secret file on him at home. She's also anti-government, which could stem from the fact that her father's on the run from a corrupt government. MJ could also be the reason that Fury is personally in Europe with Peter Parker, instead of having someone else from S.H.I.E.L.D. keeping tabs on him. It would certainly make for a pretty interesting twist in the franchise, and Peter would see himself under even closer scrutiny from Fury if it turned out to be true. Samuel L. Jackson will be reprising his role as Nick Fury in Spider-Man Far From Home, and that's led some fans of the MCU to theorize that he'll be Peter Parker's new mentor going forward in the franchise. Up until now, Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark has been overseeing Spider-Man's superhero career, but it's no secret that without spoiling Avengers Endgame in any way, shape, or form, his role will be reduced in the MCU from now on, at the very least. There are also several clues that Stark won't be in Parker's life in Far From Home, just going by what we've seen in the movie's trailers. We see Spider-Man in a homeless shelter with his Aunt May, when Happy Hogan turns up with a check donation for $500,000, but it's Pepper Potts who signed it, not Stark. If Tony was still in Peter Parker's life, he would surely never have skipped a photo opportunity like that. And with Fury around, it certainly makes sense that he'd take over Stark's role as far as Spider-Man is concerned. His gritty style could be just what Peter needs to add a little more ruthlessness to his personality and up his game as a superhero. Speaking of Nick Fury, there's a theory that one of his old friends might just appear in Spider-Man Far From Home, and that old friend in question is none other than Brie Larson's Carol Danvers, the superhero otherwise known as Captain Marvel. The main reason for the theory is that in the Far From Home trailer, Nick Fury can be seen alongside a female, firing guns at one of the elemental villains. Most people have assumed the female in question is Cobie Smulders' Maria Hill, but this character seems to have lighter hair than her, so could it be Carol Danvers? Tony Stark was the flagship character of the MCU for its first decade, and Danvers is expected to take his place. So in a weird way, this might make sense. In truth, Far From Home could do with all the star power it can muster, given that it's the direct follow-up to Avengers Endgame, and could easily end up being quite underwhelming in comparison. We know that Spider-Man will don at least a couple of new costumes in Spider-Man Far From Home, one of which is confirmed to be a black version of his traditionally more colorful suit. Now, it's generally believed that the suit will be a stealth suit provided by Nick Fury, with the intention of keeping Spider-Man off the radar. The idea being to limit any connection between the web-slinger and the United States in order to avoid an international incident. The dark coloring may also be due to the fact that Fury wants Spidey to learn more about Mysterio and the Elementals, what their intentions are, how powerful they are, and so forth. But there's another theory that the movie might go the way of Spider-Man 3, with Spider-Man going dark in terms of his nature, as well as in terms of his coloring. Oh god, not that again. But maybe, for example, something happens in Far From Home that sends Peter Parker down a dark path. Perhaps the influence of some evil mystical force, or even an alien symbiote, and the suit could be the physical manifestation of that. And that nicely connects us to this next theory. The timing of the Venom movie, which came out in October of last year, has led some fans to theorize that it's linked in some way to Spider-Man Far From Home. That would mean Tom Hardy's character, having been established in his solo movie, would either make an appearance or at least being referenced in the next Spidey offering. The Venom movie was, of course, part of Sony's new franchise and not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it wouldn't be the strangest thing that's ever happened if they crossed over with each other in some way. The Far From Home aspect of the Spider-Man sequel's title could, according to some fans, refer to space, where Spider-Man would come into contact with a Venom symbiote. But it could also refer to Peter Parker ending up in San Francisco, the city Venom becomes the lethal protector of, which was how the 2018 movie ended. In all fairness, it really is about time that Spider-Man and Venom met on the big screen in a manner that didn't completely suck. 2007 Spider-Man 3 saw Topher Grace as the black symbiotic character, and he was arguably the worst comic book movie villain ever.
I like being bad.
Jake Gyllenhaal will be playing the classic Spider-Man villain Mysterio in Far From Home. Or will he? You see, there's a theory that this version of Mysterio won't be the classic version of the character at all. The Master of Illusion, known as Quentin Beck, typically comes from the same plane of existence as Spider-Man. But there's at least some evidence to suggest that that won't be the case in the MCU. The main evidence is the simple fact that he is quite obviously a lot different to the classic version of the character. He's acting heroically in the trailers, for starters, and appears to have actual powers, unlike the Illusionist from the comics, but there's more to it than that. Gyllenhaal was actually linked with the role of Spider-Man in the past. Back in the early 2000s, he nearly took over from Tobey Maguire, and the theory suggests that he may be playing a version of Mysterio, who's actually an alternate reality version of Peter Parker in homage to that fact. The multiverse concept has been introduced to the MCU since magic and the quantum realm were introduced to the franchise, so this is very possible. Moving on, it's not only different universes that Spider-Man Far From Home's characters might come from, because this theory suggests the elementals in the movie could originate in another dimension. And yes, universes and dimensions are different things entirely. Alternate versions of the same characters come from different universes, whereas extra-dimensional beings like Dormammu come from different dimensions. In the comics, the elementals are a team of beings with elemental powers that come to Earth from a different dimension prior to the edification of Atlantis. They are Hydron, Lord of the Waters, Magnum, Master of the Earth, Hellfire, Wielder of Flame, and Zephyr, Mistress of the Winds. It could even be the case that given the amount of reality-altering power that was thrown around in both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, the very fabric of the universe was damaged in the MCU, allowing beings from other dimensions to spill through into the one in which the likes of Spider-Man and Nick Fury reside. It's an interesting thought, and if it turns out to be true, it could lead to more extra-dimensional beings pouring into the MCU going forward, which is an exciting prospect to say the least. Another theory about the elementals suggests that they're actually going to surprise us by, well, not being the elementals we're expecting them to be at all. In fact, the theory suggests that they might actually be a conglomerate of classic Spider-Man villains from the comics. And the four beings known as Hydron, Magnum, Hellfire, and Zephyr won't make an appearance in the movie. It works perfectly because there are four elementals, beings themed around water, earth, fire, and air, with abilities related to those elements. And Spider-Man's rogues gallery is so extensive that he has enemies to fit the bill for all four slots. Morris Bench is the villain otherwise known as Hydro Man, who can manipulate water. Flint Marko is the real name of Sandman, who fits the Earth criteria. Mark Raxton is Molten Man, whose ability to generate heat covers the fire slot. And Andre Gerard is also known as Cyclone, as he can create whirlwinds fulfilling the air criteria. The main problem with this theory is that it could result in the MCU running into the same problems as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, with too many villains in one movie.
Where do all these guys come from?
Now, if you think the idea of Mysterio, Hydro Man, Sandman, Molten Man, and Cyclone evokes painful memories of the too many villains problem Spider-Man 3 had, just wait until you get a load of this theory. It suggests that Spider-Man Far From Home will also introduce the Sinister Six, with Michael Keaton's Vulture leading the team into action. Now, we know for certain that Keaton is in Far From Home. That's been confirmed for some time, and there must be good reason for that. At the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, you may remember his character spoke to Matt Gargan, the villain otherwise known as Scorpion in the comics. And both characters have been high-profile members of the Sinister Six in the past. So could this be the start of the team in the MCU? And will we see it develop in Far From Home? A Sinister Six movie has long been touted, and it was expected to happen prior to Sony's deal with Marvel Studios to allow Spider-Man to appear in the MCU. Maybe one condition of that happening was that the Sinister Six would form in the franchise. Far From Home could indeed be the start of that. In the comic books, Mysterio is classically depicted as being a special effects wizard and stuntman working for a major Hollywood studio, who has dreams of making a real name for himself in the movie industry. But he came to see his career in special effects as a dead-end job, and all of his attempts to become an actor were poorly received by casting directors. However, he realized that his expertise in illusions could make him an effective criminal, but that's all he ever was. A criminal who used real-world type illusions to fool his would-be apprehenders. He has managed to cause some problems for Spider-Man, but he was never going to be a top-tier villain. But this theory suggests that in the MCU, he'll have actual magical powers, like a real sorcerer, and that would make him very dangerous. It stems from the fact that the energy he's wielding in the trailer looks very similar to that wielded by Doctor Strange in the MCU. There are even extensions to the theory that suggest crazy things like Mysterio tricks Peter Parker and company into believing they're in Europe, and the elementals are just illusions he's created using magic. Obviously, Peter Parker is the MCU's Spider-Man, but one theory suggests Spider-Man Far From Home will introduce another version of the web-slinger to the franchise. Spider-Man Homecoming pretty much confirmed that Miles Morales exists in the MCU, as Donald Glover's Aaron Davis referred to his nephew, and in the comics, Davis's nephew is Morales. Moreover, in a deleted scene, Davis actually mentioned Morales by name. But there's another key reason this theory exists. On November 6, 2018, Marvel launched a website that had an official countdown to Far From Home's release on it. Notably, November 6th was exactly 240 days before the movie hits theaters, and 240 is a very significant number in Spider-Man lore. Spider-Man 240 was Brian Michael Bendis' touching farewell to Miles Morales, a character he'd created, and whom he'd taken on a 7-year journey spanning 2 universes. A countdown with exactly 240 days to go, therefore suggests that Miles Morales has a role to play in Far From Home. Whether he'll be fully introduced to the MCU in the movie or just get another mention that foreshadows his arrival in the franchise remains to be seen. But it's an exciting prospect that he might be on the way, because he's a genuinely awesome character. Okay, this is where the minor Avengers Endgame spoilers come, and they are only minor, but you've been warned regardless! It's been said for some time that Spider-Man Far From Home will pick up straight after Endgame finishes, and this theory suggests we actually saw the opening scene of the upcoming Spidey offering in the incredible 4th Avengers offering. When Endgame came to its climax, we saw Tom Holland's Peter Parker arriving at school and reuniting with his best friend Jacob Batalon's Ned Leeds. That's it. That's the spoiler, and you already knew Spider-Man was returning, so it wasn't that big, was it? That scene may actually be the opening scene in Spider-Man Far From Home. The movie could literally pick up from that exact point. After the incredibly emotional events of Endgame, Marvel Studios will want to get back to normality as quickly as possible. And this would undoubtedly be the best way to go about it, with Peter Parker back at school, living a normal life. There's no point in dwelling on what went down in Endgame. And there's definitely no point expecting to kick off the subsequent MCU release with something even close to as epic as what happened in the 4th Avengers movie. By now, we all know Nick Fury is in Europe with Peter Parker and Spider-Man Far From Home. It appears as though Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. will be using Spider-Man as an international agent, recruiting the Webbed Wonder to fight against a common threat. And there's a theory there's a very specific reason why Samuel L. Jackson's character has such a keen interest on the Queens-based superhero. In a number of other Marvel sources, Peter Parker's parents have been depicted as agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and if Far From Home reveals that they were S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in the MCU, they may have been friends with Fury in the franchise. That would give the former director of the espionage organization a vested and emotional interest in Peter. He would be the son of people he was friends with. And knowing what he'd become and how the life of a superhero can involve a lot of dangerous situations, Fury might take it upon himself to protect Spider-Man out of respect for his parents' memories. In Spider-Man Homecoming, we were introduced to the character of Mr. Delmar, the owner of the local bodega in Queens that Peter Parker bought sandwiches from. Given Spider-Man Far From Home will be set a long way from Queens, it was something of a surprise for fans to discover that Hemke Madera would reprise his role as the character in the movie. It seems extremely unlikely that by sheer coincidence Mr. Delmar would be also vacationing in Europe where Peter is. So there's a theory that there's more to the character than originally met the eye. Some fans have theorized that he might actually be an undercover S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who, aware of Peter Parker's powers, has been assigned to keep an eye on him by playing the role of a bodega owner in his own neighborhood. Others have theories about the possibility that he might even be a villain in disguise, learning about Parker in the guise of a store owner, ready to pounce on Spider-Man at any given time using his as yet unrevealed superpowers. Of course, it could just be that part of the movie is actually set in Queens and that Mr. Delmar scenes will be in his bodega, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay, we're going to end this video with arguably the craziest theory it has to offer. Are you ready for it? You know how the MCU is differed from other Spider-Man movie franchises by having Peter Parker's Uncle Ben already dead from the moment Peter was introduced? What if he wasn't? And what if Spider-Man Far From Home revealed that Uncle Ben had actually become Mysterio? That is what this theory suggests has happened. Since Tom Holland first appeared as Peter in 2016's Captain America Civil War, there's been minimal mention of his Uncle Ben. And fans were excited when they saw Ben's old briefcase being used by Peter in the Far From Home trailer. The MCU has a younger, cooler version of Aunt May, and Uncle Ben could fit the same mold. So could he have done a Doctor Strange in this universe and headed off on a mystical adventure of enlightenment, returning as the powerful Mysterio? Mysterio seemed very protective of Peter in the Far From Home trailer, and that's where this theory came from. So is this theory so crazy that it's actually true? We'll have to wait until this summer to find out. Spider-Man Far From Home hits theaters in July. So, what do you think of these Spider-Man Far From Home theories? Which one's your favorite? And do you have any of your own? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Screen Rant for more great videos like this one. See you later.